The preacher's voice echoed through the small wooden church, his words hanging heavy in the dusty air. Amelia stood at the altar in her simple white dress, her hands trembling as she clutched a small bouquet of wildflowers. The man beside her, Bartholomew Thorne, stood tall and proud, his expensive black suit making him look like a king among peasants. The whole town had gathered to witness this wedding, cramming into the rough wooden pews and spilling out onto the church steps. When the preacher asked if she would take this man as her husband, Amelia looked into Thorne's eyes. What she saw there made her blood run cold. His smile never reached those eyes. They were as empty and dark as abandoned mine shafts. She took a step back, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't." The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples through the congregation. Before anyone could react, she turned and ran, her wedding dress catching on the church door as she burst through it. The townspeople outside gasped and parted like wheat before a storm. As Amelia fled down the main street, her bare feet ticked up clouds of dust, and her veil flew off, catching on a hitching post. Behind her she could hear the commotion starting, voices rising in shock and confusion. She spotted a brown mare tied outside the general store, its owner nowhere in sight. Without thinking, she untied the rope and swung herself onto the horse's back. Years of farm life had taught her to ride, though never in a wedding dress. She urged the horse forward, and they thundered out of town as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert red and gold. Back at the church, Bartholomew Thorne stood frozen for exactly 3 seconds. Then his face transformed. The flash of pure rage that crossed his features was quickly replaced by a mask of concern and confusion. He turned to the congregation, spreading his hands in a gesture of bewilderment. "My poor dear bride," he said, his voice smooth as honey. The pressure of leaving her family back east must have overwhelmed her. Women can be so delicate in their emotions. The crowd murmured sympathetically. Thorne was the richest man in the valley, owner of the biggest cattle ranch and half the businesses in town. When he spoke, people listened. From his office window across the street, Sheriff Marcus watched the scene unfold. He was a quiet man who had seen 40 winters come and go, leaving lines around his eyes and gray in his black hair. He had been sheriff for 5 years, and in that time, he had developed a habit of watching and listening more than talking. Something about this whole situation didn't sit right with him. Mail-order brides were common enough out here where women were scarce, but Amelia had seemed different when she arrived 2 weeks ago. She was educated, could read and write, and had a quiet strength about her. She didn't seem like the type to panic and run without good reason. Marcus watched as Thorne strode across the street toward his office, his expensive boots clicking on the wooden boardwalk. The sheriff met him at the door. "Sheriff, we have a situation," Thorne said, though his tone suggested he was giving an order rather than stating a fact. "My bride has had a moment of feminine hysteria and fled town. I need you to retrieve her before she hurts herself out there in the wilderness." Marcus studied the man's face. There was something in Thorne's expression that didn't match his words of concern. "Why don't you send your own men after her?" Marcus asked. "You've got a dozen ranch hands you know how to track." Thorne's jaw tightened slightly, but his smile never wavered. "This is a delicate matter requiring official intervention. Besides, a woman alone at night will be frightened enough. When she sees the law coming for her, she'll surrender peacefully." He paused, then added with a slight sneer, "Wait until midnight to ride out. By then, the cold and the darkness will have taught her the foolishness of her actions. She'll be grateful to be rescued." Marcus nodded slowly, not trusting himself to speak. Thorne left, satisfied that his orders would be followed. As midnight approached, Marcus prepared for the ride. He packed his saddlebags with extra water, blankets, and food. Something told him this wouldn't be a simple retrieval. He had learned to trust his instincts over the years, and right now, they were screaming that something was very wrong. He strapped on his gun belt, checked his rifle, and saddled his horse, a reliable black gelding named Cole. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the desert landscape as he rode out of town, following the clear trail Amelia had left in her haste. The desert at night was a different world from the scorching daytime. Coyotes called to each other across the valleys, and nocturnal creatures rustled in the sagebrush. Marcus tracked steadily, reading the signs in the moonlight. The mare's hoofprints were deep and widely spaced, showing that Amelia had pushed the animal hard at first. But as the trail led into the rocky hills, the prints became more measured. She was pacing the horse now, trying to preserve its strength. Smart girl, Marcus thought. She wasn't just running blind in panic. She had a destination in mind. As the hours passed, Marcus noticed something else. The trail was leading towards Skeleton Canyon, a maze of rocks and narrow passages that provided excellent hiding spots. It was also dangerous territory, home to rattlesnakes, mountain cats, and occasionally, outlaws passing through. No frightened woman would head there unless she had a very good reason. Unless she was more afraid of what was behind her than what lay ahead. Dawn was breaking when Marcus finally caught up with her. He found her in a narrow canyon, the stolen mare exhausted and laddered with sweat. Amelia was sitting on a rock, her wedding dress torn and dirty, her dark hair wild around her face. When she heard his horse approaching, she jumped to her feet and pulled out a small Derringer pistol, pointing it at him with shaking hands. "Stay back," she warned, her voice hoarse. "I won't go back. I won't." Marcus stopped his horse and raised his hands peacefully. He didn't reach for his own gun. Instead, he dismounted slowly and stood there, letting her see he meant no immediate threat. "Miss Amelia," he said calmly, "I'm not here to hurt you. But I need to know something. Why did you really run? What made you flee from that church like the devil himself was after you?" Something in his tone, perhaps the genuine concern, made her lower the gun slightly. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," she said bitterly. "Everyone thinks Bartholomew Thorne is a pillar of the community. He owns half the town. Who would believe a nobody like me?" Marcus took a step closer, still keeping his hands visible. "Try me," he said simply. "I've been sheriff here for 5 years, and I've learned that things aren't always what they seem. Sometimes the finest clothes hide the darkest hearts." Amelia studied his weathered face for a long moment. Then, as if a dam had broken, the words poured out. "Last night, I couldn't sleep. Wedding nerves, I thought. I went for a walk behind the hotel to clear my head. That's when I heard voices from Thorne's office next door. The window was open, and I recognized his voice. He was talking to 3 of his men. They were laughing about something, so I moved closer to listen." She paused, her hands clenching into fists. "They were laughing about me, about how easy it had been to trick me into coming here, about how I was just like the others." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "What others?" he asked quietly. "His 2 previous wives," Amelia continued. "Both died within a year of marriage. Everyone said it was accidents. One fell from a horse, the other drowned in the river. But Thorne's men were joking about how clumsy those women had been, how they just couldn't seem to stay alive once they signed over their property deeds. That's when I learned the truth about why he wanted to marry me." She reached into a hidden pocket in her dress and pulled out a folded document. "My father died 6 months ago and left me a small piece of land out here. I thought it was worth his desert, just a few acres of rocks and scrub. That's why I agreed to come as a mail-order bride. I had nothing left back east, and Thorne's letters seemed so kind and generous. But last night, I heard him say that my land has the only reliable spring for miles around. In a drought year, whoever controls that water controls the whole valley. He planned to marry me, force me to sign over the deed, and then I would have an unfortunate accident just like the others." Marcus took the document and examined it. He knew the land she was describing. It seemed worthless on the surface, but he had noticed during last year's drought that the creek there never ran dry when all others did. Thorne was already the most powerful man in the valley, but with control of that water he would be unstoppable. The sheriff looked at Amelia with new respect. "You did the right thing by running," he said, "but we have a problem. Thorne owns judges and lawmen in 3 counties. Your word alone won't be enough to stop him." "Then I'm dead anyway," Amelia said flatly. "He'll never stop hunting me." Marcus shook his head. "Not if we're smart about this. I've been collecting evidence against Thorne for years, but I've never had a witness brave enough to speak up. Together we might have enough to bring him down. But first we need to get you somewhere safe. He won't expect you to double back toward town. There's an old relay station about 5 miles from here. We can hole up there and figure out our next move." They rode hard as the sun climbed higher, the desert heat already beginning to build. The relay station was a crumbling adobe structure that had been abandoned when the new road was built 10 miles south. It still had thick walls and a good view of the surrounding area. Marcus helped Amelia inside and gave her water from his canteen. She drank gratefully, then asked, "Why are you helping me? You work for the town, and Thorne practically owns the town." Marcus settled down across from her, his rifle across his knees. "I became a lawman because I believe in justice," he said. Not the kind you can buy, but real justice. I've watched Thorne operate for years, using his money and power to crush anyone who opposes him. I've seen families driven off their land, businesses destroyed, and yes, I've had my suspicions about those 2 dead wives, but nobody would talk. Everyone was too scared, until now. They had been at the station for barely an hour when Marcus spotted the dust cloud on the horizon. Riders coming fast, at least 6 of them. He recognized Thorne's big white stallion in the lead. They found us quicker than I expected, he said grimly. Thorne must have decided not to wait for me to bring you back. He's coming to handle this himself. Amelia stood beside him at the window, no longer the frightened bride but a woman with steel in her spine. What do we do? She asked. Marcus checked his ammunition and handed her his spare rifle from his saddlebags. Can you shoot? He asked. She nodded. My father taught me. Good, he said. We're going to make a stand. Thorne brought thugs, not lawmen. That means he's operating outside the law now. Whatever happens here, he can't explain away easily. But first, we need to even the odds. See that pile of old brush near the east wall? When I give the signal, I want you to set it on fire. The smoke will confuse them and block their view from that direction. Thorne and his men surrounded the station, and Thorne's voice rang out across the desert. Sheriff Marcus, I'm disappointed in you. You were supposed to bring my bride back, not hide her from me. Send her out now, and I might forget this ever happened. Marcus called back through a crack in the door. She's not going anywhere with you, Thorne. I know what you did to your other wives. It's over. There was a pause. Then Thorne laughed. You always were too noble for your own good, Marcus. Nobody's going to believe a hysterical woman and a sheriff who's clearly lost his mind. My men here will swear that you kidnapped my bride. Tragic how you both died when you refused to surrender. The first shots rang out, shattering the morning stillness. Marcus returned fire, his shots careful and precise. He had limited ammunition and couldn't waste it. The adobe walls were solid, but they wouldn't hold forever against sustained gunfire. Now, Marcus shouted to Amelia. She struck a match and tossed it onto the brush pile. The dry wood caught immediately, sending thick black smoke billowing across the battlefield. In the confusion, Marcus heard men coughing and shouting. He used the distraction to move to a better position, picking off one of Thorne's men who had gotten too close. Amelia proved she hadn't lied about her shooting skills, firing steadily from her window, keeping the attackers pinned down. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then, through the smoke, Marcus saw his chance. Thorne had moved forward, trying to get a clear shot at the station. He was partially hidden behind his horse, but Marcus had spent years learning to shoot in difficult conditions. He aimed carefully, waiting for just the right moment. When Thorne shifted to reload, Marcus fired. The shot caught Thorne in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. With their leader down, the remaining men lost their nerve. These were hired guns, not soldiers with a cause. They weren't getting paid enough to die in a shootout with a determined sheriff. Drop your weapons, Marcus commanded, stepping out of the station with his rifle trained on them. One by one, they threw down their guns and raised their hands. Marcus and Amelia tied them up while Thorne writhed on the ground, cursing and threatening them both. The ride back to town was like something out of a dream. Marcus led the procession, with Thorne and his men tied to their horses behind him. Amelia rode beside the sheriff, her head held high despite her torn dress and tangled hair. The townspeople came out to stare as they passed, unable to believe what they were seeing. The invincible Bartholomew Thorne, brought low and bleeding, tied up like a common criminal. In the town square, Marcus stopped and addressed the growing crowd. This man, he said, pointing to Thorne, is guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. He planned to kill Miss Amelia here, just as he killed his 2 previous wives, all for their land and water rights. I have evidence and a witness. For too long we've let money and power rule this town instead of law and justice. That ends today. Amelia stepped forward and told her story to the crowd. Her voice was clear and strong as she described what she had overheard. When she finished, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then, one by one, others began to speak up. A farmer told how Thorne had threatened to destroy his crops if he didn't sell his land cheap. A shopkeeper revealed how Thorne had extorted protection money from local businesses. The dam of fear had finally broken, and the truth came flooding out. Within days, a federal marshal arrived to take charge of the case. The evidence against Thorne was overwhelming. Not only did he face charges for the murders of his wives, but also for extortion, fraud, and attempted murder. His empire crumbled as his assets were seized, and his victims were compensated. The town, free from his shadow, began to heal and grow in new directions. Amelia kept her land and that precious spring. She built a small house there and started a school for the local children, using her education to give them opportunities their parents never had. She and Marcus became friends, then something more, though they took their time about it. Both had seen enough of rushed relationships and false promises. When they finally married 2 years later, it was a quiet ceremony with just a few close friends, nothing like the spectacle that had started this whole adventure. The town prospered under Marcus's continued leadership as sheriff. With Thorne gone, honest businesses thrived, and new families moved in, drawn by stories of a place where justice actually meant something. The old relay station where Marcus and Amelia had made their stand became a local landmark, a reminder that sometimes two people with courage can stand against corruption and win. Years later, when people asked Amelia about that day she ran from her wedding, she would smile and say it was the best decision she ever made. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. She had learned that true courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what needs to be done despite that fear. And Marcus would add that justice isn't about following orders or protecting the powerful. It's about protecting those who cannot protect themselves and standing up for truth, even when it costs you everything. Their story became legend in that part of the desert, told around campfires and in saloons. How a mail-order bride and a principled sheriff took down the most powerful man in the valley. How they proved that money and threats couldn't buy everything. How sometimes, when good people stand together, they can change the world, or at least their small corner of it. And in a frontier where life was hard and often unfair, that was a story people needed to hear. It gave them hope that tomorrow could be better than today, that justice could prevail, and that sometimes running away is really the first step towards standing your ground. If you enjoyed the story of courage and justice in the Old West, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more tales from America's frontier. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know what kind of Western stories you'd like to hear next. Until then, remember that history is full of ordinary people who did extraordinary things when it mattered most.